The largest and best known citadel of the Mycenaean civilization is, not surprisingly, Mycenae. It was excavated in the 1870s by an archaeologist by the name of Heinrich Schliemann, who also identified Ilium in Turkey as the site of Troy and later would go on to excavate it. Uh, but what Mycenae is essentially a large plateau that was leveled by hand and then encased in a large stone enclosure wall. So you can kind of see from the reconstruction here within the palace, the plateau at Mycenae, this incredibly intricate fortified complex. It's built around a central palace that contained a temple and a courtyard and a throne room for religious rituals. The throne room here is called a megaron. We'll talk about what a megaron represents a little bit later. But there are also multiple areas of craft production and storage around the exterior of the walls. The other aspect of life here that's going on within the walls of the citadel at Mycenae is burial, and in particular elite burials. We have the reconstruction, have the excavations here of the grave circles, the shaft tombs at Mycenae, but there's also later types of tombs within the complex itself, tholoi or above ground mausoleum kind of barrel work tombs. So we have those elite burials. Now, the earliest of those were placed in these stone-lined shaft graves, which you can see the grave circle here. Most of Schliemann's excavations focused on the temple or the palace and the burial circle. Now, the grave assemblages here included bronze armor, weapons, and gold, objects of gold. And the most famous of these is the Mask of Agamemnon. Again, right, the legacy of the Homeric epic was why Schliemann was excavating at the site of Mycenae. So you have this hammered gold burial mask that was recovered by Schliemann, and he claimed it was the Mask of Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces in the Trojan War. Now, there's a lot about Schliemann. He's an incredibly poor archaeologist in terms of actual excavation technique. He's the reason archaeologists are predicted as great grave diggers and kind of the Indiana Jones style. But he's also not a particularly scrupulous man. There are still rumors that the Mask of Agamemnon is a modern forgery, that Schliemann planted it in his excavations to gain notoriety and power and prestige through this. And there's a lot of the same types of concerns with the hoard that he found at Troy. And then, not only that, because it was the 1860s, Schliemann pocketed a lot of what he found. And so there's still unknown artifacts that were recorded in the excavations at Troy that were shown up, and some people have argued that they were in storage by the Nazis, or that they were stolen from then stolen from the Nazis by Stalin when Soviet forces took Berlin. So there's still a lot of you can kind of the Schliemann's hoard is still kind of one of these big archaeological mysteries. Our later burials, like the tomb of Eritreus, here are tholoi tombs. That is, they have the large corbelled architecture that you'll see here in the gates of Mycenae that I showed you a short video on. That then is kind of overarching a beehive tomb. And because these are above ground and incredibly visible, almost all of them were looted in antiquity. So there's not a lot of remains from within these archaeologically. But they are really interesting when we start to think about the use of space and the signaling of power by the elites at Mycenae. Now, the best known archaeological example of one of these palaces is the Palace of Nestor that was excavated beginning in 1939 and has been more or less continuously excavated since. Again, Nestor is one of those figures in the Trojan War in Homer's epics, and so we can't escape that kind of idea in the popular consciousness. Now, this probably isn't actually the Palace of Nestor, no more than the Palace at Mycenae is the Palace of Agamemnon. But what we do see is a real organized palace complex that's focused on a central courtyard, which is just out of the frame here, where we have controlled access into the Megaron Temple, into a covered porch courtyard for restricted access, through an antechamber, and then into the throne room with this large circular hearth at the center of the complex. Now, here's a reconstruction of that Megaron Temple. It has the hearth, or here represented as a fountain. But we probably think about this as a place to make offerings and libations. Now, around the area in the courtyard are a series of storage and production facilities. And at Pylos, what makes this a really fascinating find is we have a collection of linear B tablets that outline palace administration. And those tablets record the activities of bakers and bronzesmiths and carpenters and masons and potters and sailors, shepherds, scribes, and messengers. It records payments to these people and the goods and resources that they provided for the state. So we have a really nice economic transactions, right? You could almost file their taxes based on the ideas of these linear B tablets. So the goods and receipts are part of this. And we can kind of look at this as representing part of those religious rituals and festivals through this, but also in controlling the distribution of those very same goods and resources that are used to recreate that those systems. Now, in 2015, excavators recovered the tomb of the Griffin warrior at Pylos, and this is probably one of those elite rulers within the palatial context. And it's a male in his 30s, and he was buried with a gold-hilted sword and dagger, multiple gold and silver vessels and rings, and a lot of the iconography consists of those griffins. And if we saw the griffins, we might think back to the Mycenaean Lion's Gate, or even at the palace at Knossos, with those griffins lining the throne room. This becomes a very important symbolic representation. The other thing that we see is numerous feasting vessels. Burial feasts become an important component here. And I think this is something to keep in mind, much in the same way that we're talking about with the Iron Age in Europe. Right, the show and prestige of feasting the dead becomes an important integral component of maintaining status and power in Mycenaean society.